The contemporary reemergence of international justice has been anchored in a belief that if we do not face our past, we'll be condemned to repeat it. I am an interdisciplinary scholar trained as a political scientist, and my work focuses on the politics of international human rights and the politics of international war crimes tribunals. When I graduated from college in 1991, the world was my classroom. I traveled in Western Europe, changed plans as the Soviet Union was crumbling, and decided to travel in Eastern Europe. I was drawn to try to understand political change. I was similarly drawn to the tumultuous end of the apartheid regime in South Africa and spent a summer during college traveling in South Africa. And then in the early and mid-90s, I really became interested in the question of how war-torn or post-authoritarian societies try to come to terms with their painful pasts. I did a paper on the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and the ball got rolling, really focused on these new experiments in international law that emerged in the 1990s, which were these international war crimes tribunals. A lot of my research revolves upon interviews with key diplomatic actors, activists, observers, analysts, and key people at the tribunal to understand what has transpired, what types of strategies have been deployed to press states to cooperate, and when will they actually help these tribunals prosecute high officials involved in the states. And in that context, understanding the politics of nationalism is important. In Serbia, especially under Milosevic, he was loath to cooperate. And then with the transition to a democratic era, there were hopes that the new leadership would be much more interested in cooperating because there was the assumption that Democrats must be in favor of international law and transparency and truth. And that was not necessarily the case because of the kind of long half-life of nationalism. Contemporary international justice has developed in stages over the last quarter century. In the early 1990s, there were the creation of individual ad hoc tribunals. But then there was a movement to create a single court that would be global in reach, in which no state or no individuals would be beyond the reach of justice. So here we're seeing kind of a push for universality. The United States was the kind of key mover and shaker behind the development of these ad hoc tribunals. But when it came to the International Criminal Court, the permanent standing court in The Hague, the US grew very ambivalent. The crucial factor here was that it was much easier for the US to be an ardent supporter of these tribunals that focused on other people's wars than to be a supporter of a permanent court in which the US theoretically could fall under the scope and scrutiny of the ICC. Those who argue that justice is necessary for peace and transitions to civilian rule and democracy butt heads against others who say, look, the process of these trials can at times be so controversial and volatile that the legal process itself can be destabilizing in fragile post-conflict societies. There's data on both sides of those arguments, but the argument is that at least in the long term, a kind of a credible reckoning in a neutral court of law will help provide a stronger basis for a rule of law society.